What I'm addressing today is the misunderstanding of Jordan Peterson. A lot of people seem to think that what Jordan Peterson's doing is a trick of language, right? He's somehow bridging the language between the secular and the religious, and that's, part of his magic. And I'm here to tell you that that's just not the case. The idea that this is a language problem is very age of Gnosis, and that's what I'm going to get into right here. So, my definition of age of Gnosis, which is basically what we're living in now, that is this idea that the world is propositions, and propositions are the highest value. And that's what knowledge is. It's just propositions, because we somehow believe, rather incorrectly, that that's how people learn. You give them propositions, and that is the thing that drives the world. You write a book like Karl Marx, and suddenly the world changes, and things like that. Now, this is categorically and in all possible ways false. It's not that words don't have an impact. Of course they do. I'm here on a YouTube channel. You're listening to it. Not that hard, right? But they don't seem to have this outsized effect that people are giving to them. And the reason why I think it's important to frame things as the age of Gnosis, because the age of Gnosis is a better term for what's going on than modernity. Because the age of Gnosis skews us towards materialism. And that materialism is what Peterson's addressing. Okay? So when you understand the age of Gnosis, this focus on propositions as the thing, the magic, or the most important thing in the world, propositions, they point to material most easily and most precisely and most accurately. Now you get a sense for how we sort of got there. And so that's a better way to think of it than modernity or postmodern or any of these other terms. They're all nonsense terms by relatively weak thinkers in an attempt to redefine something that they don't understand. And fair enough, it's difficult enough to understand. And I think that in some sense, what Peterson's doing is he's taking you out of that observational state of trying to know things through propositions and materialize them, and he's putting you into the state of experience. So taking you away from observation, which tends towards objective material reality. I've got a video about that. It tends towards that idea, but it puts you as an observer outside of the world. What Peterson's doing is putting you back inside of the world. And the thing is, the reason why he's able to do this is because he's above average by all the measures that we have, and fair enough, these things are things that you can measure, wielding the tools of materialism. He's a top 1% scientist. By whatever measure you want to use in his field, we can argue about whether or not his field's valid science, because I get questions about psychology in general, but I don't think it's unfair to say, oh, he did real experiments that are really important, and they really are well cited and were long before his rise to popularity. Obviously, there was a change after he got more popular, but even before that, he was already in that top 1%. And so he's very good at wielding these tools. Now, these tools are logic, reason, and rationality. Those are the tools of materialism. Those are tools of age of Gnosis. Right? Because how do you validate, vet, or make consistent your propositions? Well, logic, reason, and rationality, unfortunately for pretty much everybody, they only show consistency. They don't show correctness, they don't show accuracy, and they don't show precision. Those are other tools. To be precise in your speech has nothing to do with being logical. The logic can maybe help with the precision, but not of your speech, right? It helps with the precision of making your points. It doesn't help with the precision of your actual speech. It doesn't help you be more precise in your wording, because lots of words are equally logical, but some are more precise than others. Even though you're following the same logical format, you can actually just replace one word and maintain that. So it doesn't affect precision, and it doesn't affect accuracy. It does affect consistency. And using consistency, you can determine over time reliability. That's something I'm going to cover in another video. But Peterson's very good at wielding this logic, reason, and rationality. And that's actually really important to understand. And so what he's doing with that is really important, because It affects both the crisis of faith people, as I call them, and the meaning crisis people. The crisis of faith people are people who had some religious upbringing, probably dropped out in their early teens to early 20s, right? That's a very common pattern for people, is to drop out of church. Those are the crisis of faith people. They didn't stay in because they had a crisis, usually caused by a sciencey thing or materialism. That materialism has infected the church. And when you apply consistency to the church with logic, reason, and rationality, which is not what it specializes in, you get a disaster and you get a crisis of faith. So as we adopt those tools, you get more crisis of faith, just straight line. It's a little harder to see with the rise of Protestantism, I'd say, if you want to look on really good time horizons where you can see things better because you have more contrast. But it's definitely there. And now it's just obvious, even in Protestantism, that this logic, reason, rationality thing and religious-y stuff are just incompatible in some fundamental way. And Vervaeke's kind of pointing that out. So he's using the tools of materialism. The meaning crisis people, on the other hand, that's all they have. They don't have any of the more poetic, more symbolic tools introduced to them when they were young. They've only got logic, reason, rationality. And that is not working. It's just not working because you can't materialism your way. You can't logic, reason, rationality your way, right? The two are linked, but not the same. But either one, not to mention both combined, will lead you into nihilism. For sure. There's no way around. We already know this. Like, this has been established, right? Because you can map that to math and say, oh yeah, this math doesn't work out well. It works out in the heat death of the universe. I mean, fair enough. That is how math works out. Maybe that shows you the limits of math, though, and not anything important about your life or the universe or anything that is actual or would become actual. There's no end to theories of why the heat death of the universe is impossible. So it's a good indication that even science can't actually agree on that, but logic, reason, and rationality sure gets you there pretty quick. So Peterson, gets you out of that phase. So it doesn't matter if you're crisis of meaning or crisis of faith. He's got a way of wielding the science, wielding logic, reason, and rationality to break you out of that, right? See, he shows you the limits of these tools by appealing to direct personal experience. The problem with observation is almost never, but in psychology is kind of an exception, about one person. It's about groups of people, and groups behave differently from persons. A person does not a group make, and because of scale, the rules change. The rules change. The manifestation of the same principle looks different to a mob than it does to a single person. Just the way it is. So when you're observing the world, you have to at least remove part, if not most of yourself from it. That divorces you from the experience. Now you're analyzing the world. And Peterson sort of shows you that analysis doesn't hold true. Why? Because of you. It always appeals to you. Telling somebody to go to the gym doesn't work. You tell yourself to go to the gym and it doesn't work. That's not universally true, but it's close enough because nothing's universally true in that way. But man, most of the people I know who tell themselves they're going to the gym never go to the gym and never have gone to the gym, myself included. So it certainly seems to work. And you're like, oh yeah, look at that. This observation that I make of, oh, you can find instances of people that go to the gym. This is called sample bias, by the way. And therefore telling people to go to the gym works. Yeah, that's heavy sample bias. But it doesn't work when it's applied to me. Oh, well, who cares if that's your observation if it doesn't apply to you? Why do you care about that? And you can say, oh, who cares? Someone cares. Okay, that someone isn't me, though, and I have to do things in the world. So the fact that other people are doing things in the world, not too interesting, actually. It's the least interesting fact that you could possibly have is that things are happening in the world, or people are doing things in the world, or any of that. This is just not interesting. So you've got this situation where Peterson's pointing out to you these observations are fundamentally incorrect, at least in terms of your personal, private experience. Super important. And that difference between observation, which is the science mode, and participation, that's how you get experience, you participate, is what Peterson's highlighting. And what talks more concretely, we'll say, about experience. So you can say language, but language is a big bucket. There's things like body language, right? There's aspect to language that's wrapped up in your tone and not your words. Obviously, it should be clear to everybody. Sarcasm is a great example. Sarcasm doesn't work on the internet. Why? Because sarcasm is usually functions by tone and not by words. Same words, opposite meaning. That's what sarcasm effectively is. You don't really mean what you're saying. Oh, okay. Well, that should tell you something about the limits of language. So, what is the way to talk about experience that's an upgrade to, we'll say, mere language? But it maybe is also subject to language, is manifest through language. Well, it's story. And what does Peterson do? He talks about story. And he talks about how you relate to a story like Pinocchio, when in fact, by any scientific framework, logic, reason, rationality, and just common sense, you shouldn't understand any of Pinocchio at all. There's no aspect of that movie that makes sense. It doesn't make any sense in a scientific frame. It makes perfect sense in a relational frame, something science cannot ever be used to talk about ever. If somebody tells you they can, run away from that person. They are crazy. They're nuts. Just stay away from them. It's easier. It'll be easier. Right? So Peterson shows you that you can relate to story, and then shows you how you can relate in the story, how the story holds together the sort of tricks or magic or systems that make a good story good. Right? By showing you the symbolic or poetic representations of these things and how they're correct. They're not scientifically correct. They're not logically correct. They're not non-logical identity either. Well, I don't know where Dr. Favicki got that from, but kind of crazy. Everything's relational. This isn't that hard. Peterson lives in the relational, but he lives more in the realm of science because he's really good at it. So he is bridging something, but he's bridging your experience to story, right? Which takes you out of observation mode and out of the propositional tyranny, and he's effectively replacing it with a procedural tyranny, which is still an upgrade, right? Maybe it's not an upgrade enough because without the poetic way of informing the world, see this video for more, you're not going to get that much further. Now, the upgrade is still huge, but it's limited, right? You need to get out of the propositional and procedural and into the participatory and poetic. And as it turns out, engagement with the world, in other words, participation, which gives you experience, which is how you learn, that trumps observation. It trumps theorizing, it trumps understanding, and it trumps the sort of recent definition of knowing, age of Gnosis. Knowing is just propositions, really. It's not the form of knowing that everybody else has always talked about, which is knowing by doing, knowing by participating, knowing because you're involved and engaged and related to something. You don't know anything when you read a book. I have a video about that. And that change to engagement in the world is what makes all the difference. I can't engage in the war in Palestine or Ukraine or any of the wars in any of the African countries. I'm sure there's at least 3 going on right now that I know nothing about. I can't engage in them, but I can engage in cleaning my room. I can engage in being more precise in my speech. I can engage in these procedures that Peterson gives you in 12 Rules for Life, which, by the way, I have a book club of. If you haven't seen that, you might want to check it out. I'm not overly kind to Peterson, I think, but I don't think I'm overly harsh either. So you can correct me in the comments if you think that's wrong. So Peterson's general message is about pulling you out of the video game reality where you're an observer. Even if you, quote, play a video game, you're the observer. Why? Because you get to turn it on and off. It gives you godlike powers over the world. And once you start mimicking godlike powers over the world, you expect them everywhere. That's just going to happen to you. This is why I kind of avoid most video games. You know, Use them as entertainment, that's fine, sparingly. You don't stay stuck at entertainment. Can be an addiction just like heroin. Don't do that. Peterson has you in the world and being better through that procedural tyranny, these simple procedures. And that's just a huge upgrade for most people, because before they weren't seeing themselves as in the world. They were seeing the world as a video game that has bugs and needs to be fixed by the developers. Fair enough. And they're seeing everybody else as the developers. They don't see them as having any impact at all. And then when they try to manifest impact, what do? They put words on signs and they yell words at other people as though those words are supposed to make those other people do things. And while protests have certainly in the past moved the world, they were only the visible component of the invisible thing making that happen. And that is what no one understands. And if you don't really understand that, then you can't really understand what happened with Peterson. It's not a lightning in the bottle scenario, but it is an electric potential being formed around, we'll say, a specific point. And that specific point is Jordan Peterson. If you can understand that all these signals were there and they all came together around one person, look at how many things Jordan Peterson is at the center of all at once. He's at the center of free speech and pronouns. He's at the center of the rot in academia. He's at the center of the antinatalism. He's at the center of the trans issue, all at the same time. And he's wielding logic, reason, and rationality better than everyone around him publicly, because YouTube. And that makes all the difference in the world. It's not the language. It's not bridging the language. It's not even the concepts. It's more the personal transformation, which is important, but insufficient for the meaning crisis or for the crisis of faith. It's completely insufficient, but it's an important first step for sure. It's important to get your upgrade so that you can be better, so that you can participate in your own experience instead of expecting other people to change the things you don't like in the outside world by holding up a sign or shouting at somebody or organizing. Organizing is great if you're going to build something. If you're not going to build something, I get questions about your organ. I'm not saying it's invalid or you shouldn't do it. I'm saying I got questions. Those questions need to be answered first. So that's what Peterson did. I mean, all the other things too. I've got videos about all this. Got a whole playlist on Peterson. But that's what Peterson did. It's super important to understand it's not bridging the language. Language is not magic. You put words in the wrong order, even in so-called magic, and you're not going to get anything. But I'm actually not aware of any magical systems that will say were used that are only words. Should be a hint that words aren't the magic. Maybe they help the magic. Maybe they focus the magic. Maybe they make the magic happen, whatever. I don't know what conception people are using, but it's not just that you have to say Wingardium Losar correctly. You also have to have the movements of the wand correct. And some of the movements of the wand, in this case, are the wielding of the broadcast medium. In this case, YouTube. How do I know that? You're on YouTube watching my video, or Rumble, or wherever, right? Podcasts. Yes, those are the wands. The words need a medium too. And those are the wands. So Peterson brings these things together. That could be a freak accident. It could have been somebody else, but it wasn't, right? Or it could have been no one, and things would have festered longer until we had that coalescing. But like we had around Charlie Kirk, which I have a live stream on here. Just listen to the first hour or so whenever I end the monologue and learn more about how that works. But it's really important that you understand what he didn't do. He didn't merely use language to bridge the gap between secular and religious life. It hasn't even happened. Most of the conversations are still using the, quote, secular language. They're just seeing that isn't sufficient to describe the world in which they have experiences through their participation, not through the observation of other people or worse yet, because this is what most people have to do because they're just not smart enough to think of these things themselves, other people's words. And then they're just taking that as an authority without even realizing, I read this article. Oh, really? So you took somebody's, who was the author? Because they were your authority. Oh, no, I was skeptical. Really? You didn't know any. Why did you read the article? See, this is where all the problems come in. Peterson doesn't do that. He actually shows you by contrasting your experience with the observations that you're being given and that you're making. Super important. So hopefully this clears a few things up for people. I hope it helps. If you want to understand Peterson, you can't do it from a quote Christian lens, as he's not a Christian. You can't do it from a secular lens because secularity is a bogus idea. Right? It's an affectation. It's a fantasy that people want to be true that isn't true. It's age of Gnosis and materialism. That's what's going on there. And hopefully understanding that framework will help you to not only understand Peterson, but help in the project that Peterson's on, and maybe actually bridge the gap between Peterson and where people need to be. Because that's a real gap, and it's much more important than the Peterson gap, because a lot of people will get to where Peterson brings them without Peterson. That's been happening all along. There's just nothing to take them any further. I hope that this helps you to see something and participate with that thing. Thank you for your time and attention.